consistently seen to be underweight in all the privacy inventories that we typically think about. And so how do you typically go about surfacing some of these things?
So Pradeep, my experience with specifically handling the privacy regulations and where I come from, the present organization as well, we stream to almost all countries. We need to comply to various privacy regulations. And what I've seen is what you exactly put across, that it's not the issue with the formally tracked databases or the systems. It's actually the lack of controls, how the data is flowing within an organization after you've tracked those formal structures. So I feel the unstructured data or the derivative data is something which gets missed out, not intentionally, because it's hard to track. If you don't have the right tools in place, right methodology in place, it's very difficult to track whatever you have put in the right box here. And I completely align with you. How I look at it within my organization as well, and how I've seen for streaming data, CRM is not the only place where the customer data resides. It's sometimes analytic tables. We are tracking the watching behavior of our customers. It can be marketing campaigns, shared folders with subscriber reports. So those are the categories and those are the areas, those are the use cases which generally don't get covered in a process-based methodology or a program. My approach would always be to follow the data, pick one user ID, and trace where it is traveling. And suddenly, you'll find copies of data where no inventory was ever listed.
Yeah.
So the key would be, do you follow the data, and systems will get to reveal themselves. And that's where probably you need a strong solution in place. And yes, that's the start point, the inventory. You need to know where your data is flowing.
Thanks, Amit. So I think that sort of lines up with what we hear consistently as well. So I think that is sort of a good segue into the next layer. You've built your inventory, and now just knowing where your data lives isn't enough, right? So you need to also understand what kind of data it is and who it belongs to and how it moves. So I think this is where classification comes in. But again, right now, classification has generally meant some kind of pattern matching with a dashboard. Rightfully, they might tell you what looks like personal data, but then the problem is that DPDP also asks you to act on it, which obviously requires context and lineage, like you spoke about. So let's say, for example, we found a 12-digit number on a Confluence page about some kind of vendor onboarding. So any pattern-based engine would give you that this matches another format, and that's about it. But let's say if you're context aware, it might give you whose Aadhaar it is, where else it lives, and what was the lawful basis for using it. But if you also have your lineage awareness on this data, that's where you understand how it got there in the first place, right? So probably you understand that this was collected through some kind of form. It got replicated onto some Snowflake instance, exported to a SharePoint, copied to OneDrive, and then that has not been probably touched since months, but still contains all these records, right? So the pattern matching might surface the data you knew to look for, but lineage will probably give you that, help you basically surface the data that you didn't know about and where, and this is where you have all of these consent violations and lost evidence that basically gets concentrated. It's the place where things that has not been tracked in terms of where the data has gone. As an extension of this, I think a question to you, sir, is, when you are evaluating, let's say, any discovery or classification platform or a solution, how do you judge whether what it has, if it has the real depth? Is it pattern matching, or is it the coverage of these patterns, or is it the business context that it gives you, or is it mainly about understanding the lineage in terms of how this data has moved?
So Pradeep, how I look at it is definitely you need to do a classification and can't leave it to the pattern matching itself. Obviously, that is something which is necessarily required, but not sufficient in today's environment. And as you rightly pointed out here, and we're pointing it out, that context and the lineage is the two important thing. But I would like to add one more element to it. Can my platform also give me and translate the findings into risk? Can it give me whether what kind of a risk is there now once you've identified, classified around, put the context around it? Can you create a compliance decision for me? So if it is possible to take my solution, or when I'm evaluating solutions, I look forward for not only the context lineage, but maybe the identification of is how much is the risk around. What is the severity? What is the risk for my organization with regards to that particular data element and that particular pattern matching? So, how I think I would like to evaluate the systems is I would like to give, let's say one subscriber record and see how the tools are actually behaving. Tool should be able to show me what that data within my environment, where it is coming from, where it is moving, and whether I'm compliant or not. Whether the purpose itself, what I have taken the consents for, whether it's able to match that or not. So overall perspective, not only just giving me the data discovery or the classification. Yeah.
I agree, sir. I think that's the right move. I would say so. Like once you have your inventory, you build your classification depth to understand the context of all of these things.
Yeah.
And so we also get to the practical question of what do you do with all of this, right? So and this is basically where the most common DPDP workflow also comes into play, which is your data subject access request.
Yeah.
So again, I mean, like under DPDP, pretty much any data principal can request access or for erasure or correction of some of their records. And most of the privacy programs, of course, have a workflow in place to acknowledge these requests as well. But the problem is very few programs have a workflow to validate whether this incoming request has actually been executed end to end, right? So this is like how a typical fulfillment runs. You have a request that lands on the CMP. A privacy team raises an IT ticket across probably like marketing function, support function, wherever it lies. And each team confirms all of that by, of course, closing the ticket, acknowledging that the task has been done, and then your DPO probably marks it as fulfilled. The process looks clean, of course, and everything looks good on paper. But then where it typically starts falling apart from what we've seen is that you will have these other systems that still hold copies of these records. You have exports lying from, let's say, your marketing campaigns that was done a couple of years ago, and it is in somebody's OneDrive. Or you have your training sets on Databricks, which still contains the row that you did not want. And it doesn't, of course, like we are saying, it's not that somebody was trying to do something wrong or was trying to lie about it. It's just that these data was, of course, like just outside of the line of sight of the where workflow has run. So this is where we are trying to say that the fulfillment of a specific request is not the same as validating it. So a CMP records the request that comes in, and your privacy tool can track the ticket, but none of them is actually verifying what happened on the other side, right? So essentially what I think we need is like an independent layer that scans for all of these principals identities after the request closes, and then produces some sort of evidence, like where the data was and whether it was actually deleted or not, and like who confirmed it and when and what of all of that, right? So And probably this is the kind of artifact that the regulator would typically be looking for. Um, so I think, sir, with that, like when you see any data request or any data principal, like, making a request, how do you go about building confidence that, the what was closed in the ticket is actually what is gone across every system, and how do you typically go about building a validation step in this entire workflow?
So Pradeep, you rightly pointed out this is one of the most important aspects of a privacy program in an organization, and this is typically an operations of the privacy program. And how I look at it is this is another aspect where you will be doing an action and then communicating to the world how well are you taking care of the DSAR. So this is the place where you're also communicating to the outside world and somewhere actually acknowledging to the world that you're following the privacy regulation. So this is very, very important uh, in my mind because uh, you are going to communicate to the data subjects. All these documents are auditable if somebody goes to the court tomorrow that we have fulfilled their requests or not. And before we come to the question of yours, I also want to communicate to our audiences here that usually in my career, we've been GDPR compliant for some time, and we've been servicing a lot of requests. And I have seen that mostly the requests are for deletion. My assumption is the number of requests would be for deletion or correction much higher compared to other requests. There are other requests as well. And as privacy professional, we should understand them as well. Now, once this category of access as correction or deletion is most important, obviously, then we need to have methods by which we are confident that we have processed the request depending upon the maturity of the organization. So obviously you create a process as you mentioned on the left hand side. It's a techno-legal function. The privacy is slightly techno-legal function, and probably your legal team will say, have you done this? Everybody within the organization will say yes, 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 either manual or automated. How do you really then know whether the action has been taken? There is no other method other than having a solution in place which goes around and continuously monitors and checks. I would I would think that depending upon your process maturities, if you're in early stages, you will have to do a lot of validation. You'll have to do a lot of checks whether you're missing something out. Over a period of time, as you mature, probably you can relax and you need not immediately validate everything, but have less frequent validations. But there is no other method but to have a way to identify whether the deletions or correction requests across the organizations have been fulfilled. Because the data will flow, and now with the AI coming in, this data will go to the other places and spread will increase. So you need to have a tool around which gives the confidence to the DPO or to the legal counsel that we are fulfilling the requests of the users.
Makes sense, sir. I think again, I think this is where having a very deep level of understanding of the inventory one has, I think it sort of goes back to tying all of this up again. I think, and then of course, building those depth around all of these things, making sure that the validation doesn't just happen on those obvious formally tracked systems like we spoke about earlier, but into these non-obvious systems as well, so that the validation happens across the system end to end. So I mean, I think we're speaking on the workflow side. There's obviously another layer that probably gets oversold, or like to be the answer to DPDP, which is the consent management. Now CMPs, like these are like the most, I would say, the visible layer of the DPDP compliance. Like you have your cookie banners and preference centers, and like all your consent receipts. Now, because they are visible, they are sometimes, I think, they get treated as the whole answer to this. But there are things that a CMP does really well. which is of course, capturing consent at collection points, storing preferences with timestamps, and then presenting the UI for users to withdraw, right? So just pretty much all useful and part of the main workflow. But there are also things that it can't do, which is tell you which system hold data covered by that consent, like we just spoke about, and also verify the withdrawal actually propagated downstream across your ecosystem, and also detect that data has never tied to a consent record at all. I mean, this I think is sort of common. I would say if the data that you had was much before the time that you actually acquired or even had deployed your CMP solution, right? So you have all of your legacy data, and then probably you deployed your CMP today. So there are data sitting at your side that is not tied to any of these consent records, right? So I think as we have put, one way to quickly test this is like, if a user withdraws consent in CMP today, uh, is there some kind of automation that actually stops them from getting included in the next thing that happens, or does somebody have to remember and update all of these things manually, right? So these are some tests that we can obviously look at. So this is where we are saying that the consent is the interface, and the data layer underneath is the strategy. Sir, I mean, what is your view on where CMP earns its place in the DPDP program, and where do you think its boundary lies?
So yeah, Pradeep, as we were discussing for the preparation of this webinar, you rightly pointed out the CMP is the star and always comes out as a panacea for doing a DPDP. But that's not the case. It's definitely the first point of interaction for the data subjects with our systems, where the CMP comes in, whether it's a cookie banner or the preference centers or the privacy notice, and where you collect the consents. And it is definitely mandatory, definitely required as we move forward and implement and comply to. However, this is not the end all. You need to have a very strong integration with all downstream solution systems, and that consent needs to get propagated. And that's where the meat lies. Uh, uh, and you need systems, you need strong processes, you need engineering out there, and it can't be done manually. In my mind, I'm very clear, if we are running a digital systems, we really can't do it manually. It has to be done automated, because we can't have a system where consent has been withdrawn today and we are taking 2 days and the manual process goes on. So this is the front door for the house. It's great for capturing consent and preferences, but it's not the enforcement. Like for an OTT, a user opts out, but still gets targeted in the next campaign, and we have a big problem. So you need to have a propagation across the systems. If that doesn't happen, then CMP just becomes a logbook and not a proper control system. At the same time, it is not unimportant or not significant. It is definitely very significant portion in the entire tool chain for implementing DPDP.
Right. And I think when you spoke about integration and sort of bringing all of this together, I think the broader question is that, like we have obviously spoken about discovery, classification, the subject, access requests, consent management. So, but each of these things typically sits in a different platform or a different solution, right? So let's see what happens when these tools don't talk together. Um, so I mean, like the fact is that most of the tech stacks were built to solve a problem at a time, right? And rightfully so. So you'll have your DLP for the loss preventions at the perimeter, and you have CASPs for governance, and your CMPs for consent, DSPM for data sprawl, and like you have your access for IAM, and then then you have your SIM also that basically sort of collects all of these things for detections and things like that. So most of these things, I mean, still do what they were brought to do, but and they do it well as well, like you mentioned here. But um, what DPDP is changing here is that the cost of these tools not is basically not them not sharing context with each other, right? So, and it's not that this gap was not there. This has always existed, but it has mostly been an operational friction, right? And so, but now I think it is also becoming a part of regulatory evidence as well. So so where the gap shows up, as we say here, is like, consent withdrawal. Like, these are recorded cleanly in your CMP, but it doesn't reach the right tools in time. Your DLP is firing alerts, but without knowing which data is regulated or not, and then creating too much noise. And then you have your IAM, that is like, where you grant access without understanding which of those systems underneath are actually sensitive and not sensitive. And so those understanding and depth is usually not present, right? So while all of these tools individually are doing its part, so I think, like we're saying here, what's needed is basically that one live inventory underneath the stack that pretty much all of these tools can draw the same kind of context from, and then do each of those operations really well. So with that being said, sir, I mean, where do you draw the line between saying I want to look for a new tool to solve this problem of bridging this gap, versus saying that, I want to make sure that all these existing solutions have to talk to each other better in order for me to make sure that it gets me a complete end-to-end understanding of any workflow that I'm dealing with.
Pradeep, this is actually one of the most important, again, element. And this is the problem which is plagued, any CISO is also plagued with when they're discussing the security solutions, or when we're discussing the privacy. So your question was, at a management level, at a function level, you want to solve a problem. What do you want to do? Now, I would rather looking at a solution, I would spend more time. What is the problem that we intend to solve? Because this is more of an architectural decision. So I will go around and try and find out where the gap is. If the gap is about capability, let's say my tool chain today is unable to do and solve some capability issue, or is it a connectivity issue? So can I differentiate the problem into two buckets in some sense? And if the tool exists but doesn't talk, then definitely I need to fix the integration. But if the capability itself is missing, like for example, if I have a tool chain and the lineage is not covered and that feature is not there, I can keep talking about integration, but it's not going to give me that kind of a capability. Then I have to consider and I have to go for the new investment, whether it's a replacement for existing solution to get a more number of features which are going to solve my problem. So the operating word for me would be to identify where the problem is, and that will require a good set of people on my side who will be able to identify it and put it on an A3 sheet for me. This is the problem statement. These are the gaps. And now let's figure it out how you're going to solve it. So we'll evaluate what is the cost for fragmentation, whether we can go for multiple tools. They create regulatory risk around for us. And the moment so it's a trade-off, and we take a wrong choice, and we can end up with either a tool sprawl, a lot of tools within the organization not talking, and if we take another decision, they may have blind spots. So this requires architectural decision. This requires people to sit down, really identify what are the gaps, rank order them, prioritize them with respect to the risk, and depending upon whether it's a capability or a connectivity issue, take a call. That's what I would do in my mind.
Makes sense. I think this also helps vendors like us to obviously also understand where the real pain points are, and sometimes have some of these, like, probably do some of these architectural decisions on behalf of organizations like yours, so that we allow these kinds of integrations to take place. And we, like, basically can help you basically build out your larger goal, apart from serving the the use cases that we obviously intend to serve for. Um, okay, so I think we basically covered a lot of ground in terms of what the current stack has typically been like and where the gaps usually are. And so probably I'll go into some of the questions that any organization can typically start asking for any vendor that makes a DPDP claim. Of course, that includes us as well. So these are the five questions that I think anybody should typically ask for. One is, of course, the full lineage of a piece of data. If you're looking for architectural depth, to understand not just like where the data is, but then where did it go as well. You are looking at document level context, and I think this is something that I think is really important because you would want to differentiate between a PAN card that is found in a KYC form, which is okay, which is normal, versus a PAN card that is being found in a marketing export, right? So these things mean very different things based on where that specific information lies. And I think having document level insights of those underlying elements, I think, is really important. And of course, understanding the scoring methodology when any finding gets flagged as a risk. Every tool of course surfaces some kind of finding, and so as long as anybody is able to defend the methodology in terms of how they define these things, I think, and as long as that is in line with how you operate as well, I think that is one of the things to look out for. The other one is to to see if they're able to walk you through a consent withdrawal end to end and to show you the complete audit evidence. And this is where you also again test for the operational depth as well. But then again, while I also say these four questions, I think the other question to also ask upfront is to understand where any specific platform capabilities stop. Because if those underlying platforms also understand these well, that's how they can understand, that where they can integrate with, what they can do to again, come back and help build your larger story at play for any given organization, I would say. Sir, I think out of all these questions that that I probably suggest people ask, which one do you think practitioners are not asking but should be asking?
First, Pradeep, I think all of them are very, very relevant, and you put in a lot of effort to identify some of the real good questions which for any program coordinator or a DPO should be actually asking. However, if I need to put my money on, I think I will put it on question first. That is, I would like to know where did the data go, the lineage, because how I see is that there's a lot of conversation which is happening with regards to the discovery and classification. So that's something which people are talking about, people are aware of it. But lineage is something, and how the data is moving within the organization is something which still people are not really asking more questions and not really probing a lot. They're assuming that discussions with the process owners will give them sufficient information how the data is moving. But that's the difficult part, and definitely that will leave a lot of blind spots within the organization. So knowing from where I am and seeing some program which I ran within my organization, I think I'll put my weight on the lineage and how the data is moving within the organization.
Makes sense. And I think this is where I think everybody's attention is going as well in terms of tracking the underlying lineage of any given data. So with these, now again, these are some of the questions to put forth, but then to flip it and see, what should you be looking for in terms of the answers that you should probably be hearing to some of these things. Are of course these are the four capabilities I would say that you will have to look out for. Again, we already spoke about the document level context, understanding where a specific element lies, whether it's in a KYC form or a marketing export of a specific identity. It gives you two different understanding of the data. So which means the platform or the engine should be capable enough to read the document, understand the semantic of it, understand what it is talking about, and not just look for patterns within a specific file. And of course, like, the data lineage across systems is becoming important. Now, of course, like, looking at the fact that any piece of information could be across 5 to 15 systems, depending upon how many derivative systems you have in place. And if you especially have AI workloads, you have probably your prod data being fed to a training data that is then being fed to some RAG, and that is being in turn being fed to some agent. So having lineage helps you understand what is happening to this piece of information. And then the other one is having continuous posture, and not just a point in time evidence, like we're saying. Because we understand that data is constantly moving with any PI data, I would say. So the evidence that you sort of put forth has to be current at the moment when any specific regulator asks, and not be tied back to like, any assessment that you have done is at some point in time. And of course, the end-to-end processor visibility, right? So because under DPDP, so the fiduciary, like, is basically responsible for how processors handle data. So you have to have the visibility to understand the reach of that actual data flow at the processor as well. So I think these are the some of the four things to look out for in response to some of those questions that we looked at. Um, sir, I think, like, looking at these four capabilities, which one do you see as the biggest gap from everything you have seen so far in your career across any typical Indian enterprise? And what do you think that can get underweight in any typical conversation? Because it's just sometimes very hard to showcase some of these underlying capabilities.
So Pradeep, knowing how the organization take the privacy program and generally how it goes, I think the most under-discussed capability is continuous posture. Uh, why it is under-discussed, it's as probably you also pointed out, it's very hard to demonstrate in demos, and even the vendors or the OEMs, the platform OEMs, it's very hard to demonstrate. How do you see it? How do you actually really evaluate this? Requires ongoing monitoring, not the static reports. So, and somewhere even regulators really do not go around and ask, they will not ask the question that how did your system look like last quarter continuously. They will ask, show me the state now. So probably these are the reasons why the gap, or the capability which is under discussed within the community is continuous posture, privacy posture, continuous privacy posture. This has come into the security. We talk about continuous security posture, but the privacy functions have not matured, especially in the Indian context. I think we're not mature to that level that we have started asking this relevant question to our platform providers or the solution providers. Second, data lineage. Always, with the advent of AI, the spread, the kind of innovations which are happening within the organization, definitely this is something which will be a gap, and people, before we'll know, the data will be spreading all across the organization due to the AI pipelines, I feel. These are my two picks.
I think that's rightfully said, because continuous posture, while that is one of the things to look out for, is also, I would say, technically hard to sometimes get right, because considering that every system gets, like, millions of data being written and read all the time, it's very hard to sometimes keep up to date with what is the current state of data and where sensitive data is and how it's moving. So I think obviously those would be one of those primary things to look out for, to also be up to date with any assessments that we do as well. Cool. I think we have basically covered a lot. And I mean, so before we probably get to some kind of action items with these things, I would say, just to summarize everything that we have spoken so far, just to probably take a snapshot of all of this in a single slide, I think this would be that. Basically, Discovery as a checkbox. testing for depth, mainly on the Indian PII. I mean, basic DSR fulfillment without validation was obviously like, not great. Again, CMP as the strategy. Again, like it's the interface, but the data underneath is the actual strategy to look at. And having these tools as islands, which means like, not having context and all of these data, all of these tools sharing a common context from an underlying layer is one thing. And again, vetting vendors on features. I think they should also, now looking at the complexity of the way data moves, I think we have to also vet for architecture, methodology, and the underlying scope of these things in terms of what one can accomplish. And again, like buying all of these things while having these tests done on your own set of data so that you understand how all of these work with your own environment first, because again, each of these environments are different. So yeah, I think so. Obviously, the question would be then now in terms of where do you start? And I think these are some three things I think anybody should be able to do. Again, like this is vendor agnostic and regardless of whatever they essentially get through, which is basically you can like run an end-to-end DSR on test on yourself. You can pick a record, file a request, have somebody execute it, and like you can independently scan every piece of like or every system that you have for that identifier, and then you understand in terms of where the gap between what gets fulfilled versus what actually is gone becomes your evidence baseline. And again, this is something that we can also do to understand where exactly do we have to plug in the gap. The other one is to probably build the inventory that you can defend. This is again something that holds up when somebody asks, like, to show where any principal's record lives across every system. And of course, like, if you can't produce that, then you obviously know where that gap is. And I think the other one is to walk one lineage hop, and which means to basically pick any piece of personal data that moves between systems and see if you can capture that between production to analytics or source to backup or AI train or like in any source to AI training pipelines. So if you're able to like even trace this for even few minutes and understand where does it go and who created the copy, or is it current? I think these are some things that sort of these moves sort of does not cost you anything like we're saying, but then at least this reveals you what is it that you need to buy and what is it that you need to extend in your current stack and what you should probably leave alone, right? So and I think with that, probably, sorry, if you were sitting in the audience today instead of the panel, which of these would you start with in terms of the things that you would probably pick up to understand where is it that you probably need to extend or buy or leave things alone the way they are?
So Pradeep, if I'm on the other side and let's say I forget this question into two parts. If I'm in a very, very nascent stage, I'm just starting my program, definitely it'll be the inventory. There is no way I can start a program if I can't build my inventory, which I can defend to the regulator. For sure, that will be my start point. But on the other hand, if really I already have a running program, then it is absolutely important for me to have a very, very strong DSAR control. And why I say that, I want to actually tell that part. See, everything else what we are doing in a program is actually inward looking. These are the moment we fulfill the DSAR, or if we are unable to fulfill the DSAR, we are immediately non-compliant to the regulation, and it is known to our data subject and others. So let's say for some reason I'm storing the data, some security posture was not up to the mark. I can take a quarter, build something, I can do something. But TSAR is time bound. There are SLAs. I need to take an action. Otherwise, I'm demonstrating non-compliance immediately. So if I'm in a slightly advanced stage of my program Because I understand, and I want to urge everybody who's listening to this that privacy is a program. The way security has always been a program for CISOs, privacy is a program for the DPOs. It is not a day's job, it's a continuous, and you need to keep moving and improving. So if I'm starting, it is always an inventory and the lineage. If I'm in a stage 2, I will put my all weight behind the DSAR.
Makes sense, sir. I think that was pretty insightful for us as well. Okay, so I think that sort of brings us to the end of the formal track, and so before we open up for Q&A, if there are any, I think two things. First, sir, thank you so much. I think your perspective on this is basically what makes this session useful. And like having that practitioner lens, it's what makes any of these things different from like how we see and what makes any of this real. So thank you so much for your time.
Most
And
welcome. Pleasure is all mine.
thank you so much, sir. I think, and of course, everybody else who has joined as well. Thank you so much for listening. I think the recording, I think, like we mentioned, will probably hit your inbox in 24 hours or probably after 24 hours. I think so. Basically, if anything we covered today is useful and you want to take it further, you can of course reach out to us. Okay. So, do we have any questions? I think if there is any, we can drop it in the chat or we can use the raise hand button. I think if that is there. Sony, do we have any questions? What does it look like on the chat?
No.
So are we good? There's no questions. I hope this was valuable enough in itself. Okay.
Thank
Cool.
you. Thank you, Pradeep, for having me here.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for your
Thank
time.
you, audience, as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much.